If you're interested in the stuff that I'm interested in, like spooky games and mysteries, then you've probably come across the elusive LSD Dream Emulator. This game has taken the internet by storm recently for its complex nature and intrigue, and I'm super excited to talk about it today. Hopefully you're familiar with the general structure of this trippy walking simulator, but if not, you're still going to enjoy this video.
Hey everybody, how's it going? My name is SeedButter, and you're either returning to my channel for yet another Iceberg chart deep dive, or you're brand new, and if so, welcome. Today, I'm going to be covering the largest ever LSD Dream Emulator Iceberg. We've got over 140 entries to get into today, so I hope that you stick along for the entire video. This has been a really fun one to make. If you enjoy it, consider subscribing to my small channel to be a part of more deep dives just like this one. I really appreciate it. I also want to take the time to thank you/Menderman who made this iceberg. This is their third iteration of it, so this is the most entries that you've ever seen before. We've got a ton to cover.
Before I actually get into the entries of this iceberg, I want to explain the bare bones of LSD Dream Emulator. Regardless of how much you know about this game, I think a teeny bit of context will be helpful for this video. LSD Dream Emulator is an exploration game with little to no objectives. It came out in 1998, and most of the setting for the game was based off of the dream journal of an employee at Iceberg Interactive. The idea for the game came from an artist named Osamu Sato, who thought video games could be an avenue for contemporary art. Thus, it's basically a walking simulator where you navigate dreams, which are essentially levels that are about 10 minutes long. Touching an object or a tunnel, for example, will warp you to a new area. The areas themselves are static environments, but textures are occasionally swapped out. Levels end when you automatically wake up from your dream, or when you interact with an object that wakes you up early, or also if you die. Curiously, at the end of every dream, a day is marked as completed and your dream is graphed on a chart, with the axes showing upper, downer, static, or dynamic. These impact the textures that you have, and they represent the 4 main texture types in the game. The more and more dreams you play, the more the game changes, getting weirder and weirder. After a certain amount of dreams pass, you unlock a flashback option, which allows you to replay some of your recent dreams in an abbreviated form. There are 2 main types of days, A and B days, which each have subtypes, and they seem to command some of the texture and NPC rules, though again, to a degree that's not fully understood.
Did you get all that? If it confused you, don't worry, it confused me too. But these mysteries are going to be more interesting now that you have a little bit of LSD literacy. Now it's time for level 1.
Rarest PS1 game. While LSD Dream Emulator is certainly not the most expensive PS1 game out there, it's definitely one of the pricier ones. Before this game had a spike in popularity recently, a copy would run you like $300, but now it's around upwards of double that. For that reason, very few people are out playing this game on original hardware, which contributes to its mysterious nature on the internet. Spy, Gray Man. I'm so glad we get to look right at this entry. The Gray Man is one of the most well-known entities that you may encounter during your playthrough of LSD. The Gray Man appears on B-type days, right in front of you. When he does, he'll begin slowly moving towards you. On days where you encounter him, he may teleport around and appear more than once. Now this character is very, very strange. He looks like a man in a trench coat and fedora, or perhaps a traditional Asian hat, and he has no animations whatsoever, giving him a ghastly look. It appears that he's just floating right towards you. Like much about this game, we don't understand his spawn mechanics that well, and the community has experimented themselves to try and get an idea of how he works. His nickname, Spy, comes from his file name, which is symspy.mom. Now, besides the fact that his encounter is creepy, what's the deal with this character right here? Well, we do know that interacting with him by running into him can delete your saved flashback data. That, compiled with his startling nature, lends towards him being an antagonist, perhaps even the main enemy of the game. He coerces players into exploring the world a bit more carefully, modifying your playstyle with the knowledge that he can appear anywhere and block your path. There are a lot of crazy theories about this guy, like the idea that he may represent a rapist or a murderer, or someone who otherwise inflicted a great trauma on the character that he must face. He also could represent a stage of hypnagogia, a level of sleep deprivation where you get to the point of hallucinating evil entities. He'll be fairly important throughout this video, and we're going to come back to him multiple times. Bright Moon Apartment. The Bright Moon Apartment, or cottage, is a very notable location in the game, as it's where you'll begin the game on day 1. It consists of 4 floors, the first being a bar, and the next 3 containing sets of cubicles. It may seem like one of the more relatively normal areas of the game, but that's not true one bit, as entities can spawn here, such as the dying woman who may appear bedridden on B-type days. Another thing about this location is that it may have been inspired by the Meijitsu-so apartment in Hiroko Nishikawa's Dream Diary, a source of inspiration for the game that we'll mention again later on. Giant Baby. One of the more well-known and, unsurprisingly, ridiculous entities in LSD Dream Emulator is the Giant Baby Head. Now, it's very critical that you don't confuse this with the Giant Head, because these are two separate but equally stupid things you may come across. This guy likes to spawn in Kyoto around walls, and if that wasn't strange enough, approaching him will make him open his mouth, revealing a kanji character, which will then fly away into the sky. Depending on the texture of your dream, and we'll explain what that means later, don't worry, the kanji will either read East, Beguilement, Kyoto, or Star. Double Face. Double Face is another entity in the game which appears to be a double-sided human face with black eyes sporting limbs. Now you may think this is just a texture that only faces forward, but no, there's actually a different orientation of the limbs from the back showing that Double Face really does have two faces. These creatures spawn in and around Bright Moon Cottage and disappear after about 30 seconds. Depending on where they spawn, they'll have slightly different behaviors, leading the community to giving them nicknames such as Bartender, Careful One, or Coward. Weird textures. This entry is beyond open-ended. What isn't weird about this game? I guess the best way to tackle this entry is to explain the texture cycle. As I mentioned earlier, there are 4 different types of textures that can spawn on each object: the normal or static textures, the dynamic or kanji textures, the downer or evil textures, and the upper or sexual textures. The texture cycle is for 40 days, and after 10 days of each, the type of textures you'll get will switch in the order that I described, leading to increasingly weird situations. On top of that, you may actually encounter glitched textures, which to our knowledge at least are legitimate errors that occur when the game fails to change a texture after you link to a new location, and isn't a texture type in and of itself. Loud footsteps. Footsteps in the game can be kind of annoying as they're extremely loud and it's a shared complaint amongst players. Let's take a quick listen. Yeah, that's a bit annoying. Violence District. The Violence District, also known as the City or Violence Road, is an urban location in the dreamscape. It's stuck in a constant state of darkness, and evidence of crime litters the streets, from bodies to bullet holes. Interacting with entities here seems to have a negative dream effect, as players frequently find that the ending of their dream here leads to a downer rating. It's very likely that this location is based off a story in the Dream Journal titled A Violent Town, A Headless Man, which is a story about a guy who is half decapitated and searches for the person who attacked him. There's a lot of interesting entities and weird details about this map, like how you can occasionally spawn on a building and after moving in literally any direction, either plummet to your death or somehow land gently. We're going to look at this level a lot more as the video progresses. Gunman. The gunman is an entity who can spawn in warehouses in, you guessed it, the Violence District. If you breach his line of sight, he'll ignore you, but if you get too up close and personal, he'll shoot at you. You'll collapse, either dying or teleporting to the clockwork machines. He's a strange character for sure, mysteriously walking about and just shooting at people. The developers were on drugs. This is a pretty common joke in the community. Obviously the title is, at least partially, a reference to the drug LSD. And with the zany things that come out of this game, is it possible that the developers were using LSD themselves? Or at least some drugs? Well, no. There's no evidence to suggest that whatsoever, but it's just something people like to say. There are other things that LSD stands for in this game, like Link, Speed, Dream, but it's fairly obvious what it's trying to reference, at least in some manner. Increasingly weirder dreams. One thing I mentioned earlier was how as the day cycle progresses, the game will add textures that you hadn't seen before. That said, based on how you look at it, the dreams get weirder and weirder as you go, on top of the fact that the more you play this game, the more you see and the more rare encounters you may have. But yeah, here's a texture from an early phase of the cycle and that same area with a swap texture from later on. It's a lot weirder for sure. LSD DE Creepypasta. As you can imagine, this game has generated a creepypasta. In my opinion, it's very cringy, sticking to the finding a corrupted copy of the game trope. You can read about it on the Creepypasta fandom if you're so inclined. It basically just talks about a guy finding a broken version of the game and encountering the Gray Man, who makes the game's textures horrible and full of violent imagery, then gets linked to a website full of Japanese text, and after getting his Japanese friend to read it, the guy promptly flies to Japan and murders somebody. It's literally ridiculous. LSD and Remixes. LSD and Remixes is an official album associated with the game that was released with the Dream Journal. It contains some tracks from the game and some remixes from a previous album by Osamu Sato as well. If you want to listen to it, you can find it on YouTube pretty easily. Water texture. Water textures are a tad off in LSD Dream Emulator. They sort of look like a clear thing with speckles all over it, but they can change depending on the current texture being used. Entities interact with water in strange ways. Some entities just float on top of it, ignoring it like it's a chunk of land, but there are also things like shark fins which go over the water and some other entities that populate it. That's all there is for this entry. Linking. We've touched on this a couple times so far in passing, but linking is a method of transportation throughout the world of LSD Dream Emulator. It's basically teleportation. There are dynamic links, which seem random but are actually calculated. They sort of occur when you collide with a wall. Then there are static links, which can occur when you encounter special objects in the game. Finally, there's a much rarer form of link called a local link, which just moves you to a different spot in your current map. Linking is pretty interesting because with a game as seemingly random as this, learning what objects send you where can kind of point us in the right direction when theorizing about the role of objects or entities, or really just lore behind this game. It's a topic that we'll reference very frequently throughout this video. Come On And. Come On And is a track from the game and also the main theme song, appearing in some trailers and on the official soundtrack release. It's a banger, I guess. A banger full of screams. Interestingly, it doesn't appear in the game itself, except for a heavily edited version at the very end, which I'll talk about later. Osamu Sato. Osamu Sato is the mastermind behind this whole game. He's a photographer, composer, and digital artist who has created all sorts of works in his time, many of which included video games, 7 to be specific. All of which are weird, though perhaps not as weird or infamous as LSD. Bits of info about him will be mentioned frequently throughout this video, but the basic rundown of his contributions to this game is that he believed games could be an art medium and didn't require traditional objectives. The idea from this game was born out of his disdain for racing games because he wasn't good at them, so he imagined himself driving through a wall in a racing game and transporting to another dimension. The strange idea eventually culminated into the teleportation mechanics and the irrational worlds featured in LSD. After meeting an employee at Ace McAce Entertainment when he learned of her dream journal, he used it to inspire the features in this work. Ghost women. Another creepy entity you may run into in the Violence District are ghost women. If you run into her, one of two things will happen. She'll either teleport away or her head will just fall off, forcing a link to Happy Town. This is how we know they're ghosts and not just, regular women. Although regular women are quite scary in and of themselves. Dying woman. We've got ghost women, but what about dying women? Well, LSD has that too. On the 3rd floor of the Bright Moon Cottage, you can encounter a woman appearing to be close to her final moments in bed. And boy, is this entity terrifying. Why exactly is that? Well, as the days pass, the woman will slowly flicker from alive to dead, eventually just appearing as a corpse. Then, she'll disappear from the bed entirely. After another amount of time, she'll come back from the dead, first spawning as a corpse again and then finally coming back to life. The cycle then repeats. It's a really, really weird thing even for this game. The alternate textures for her character model are also, in my opinion, some of the creepiest in the whole game. Father and daughter. On a small island in the natural world, you can encounter 2 people who are presumably a father and a daughter. You can't interact with them, but you can link with the tree behind them, and occasionally a demon creature can link with you while you're crossing the bridge to get to them. I can't believe I just read that sentence. Their alternate textures are pretty creepy as well. Lovely Sweet Dream. So remember that dream journal mentioned earlier which gave Osamu Sato inspiration for much of this game? Well, its full name is Lovely Sweet Dream, which you might notice starts with the letters LSD. A full release of this dream journal actually came out in Japan, and you can read the full contents online, provided, of course, that you understand Japanese. LSD Revamped. LSD Revamped is a fan-made remake of LSD created by a community member named Figglewatts. It's a pretty awesome way to play the game, and it has an active community as well. I encourage you to check it out if you want to experience LSD because it's a whole lot easier than emulating the game and it runs much smoother. Japanese PSN re-release. LSD was re-released onto the PSN store and made available for the PS3 and PSP, but sadly only in Japan. This happened in 2010, and you can actually get this release to work nowadays. This is the only ever other official release of this game, and honestly, it's probably the only one we can ever expect. Day 365 and the ending. In a game with no objectives, and depending on your perspective, no antagonists, how do you win? How does the game end? That's a tough question to answer, and it is up for debate, but the best idea we have right now is making it to day 365. When day 365 ends, a cutscene will play, which we'll watch right here. This is what most people consider to be the ending of the game, and in speedruns for the game, this is usually what people shoot for. Also, the file for this cutscene is actually called ending.str, and it's the only thing of its kind referenced like that in the game. The cutscene itself is really strange, but it actually resembles a Hatsume, a dream that, in Japanese culture, occurs at the turn of the new year and signifies good luck. In this cutscene, and in traditional representations of the Hatsume, you'll frequently see Mount Fiji, a hawk, and an eggplant, all of which appear in this end cutscene. This is an interesting bit of trivia because it goes to show that so much of this game appears random, but perhaps it isn't, because these strange objects do have actual cultural significance. And this may be grasping at straws, but I think it's some potential evidence that there's more to this game than what it seems. LSD Dream Emulator Wiki. The LSD Dream Emulator Wiki is, you guessed it, the official wiki for the game.
It's also my new best friend because it got me through so much of this Iceberg script.
I recommend checking it out as you play through the game because it's insanely informative. Natural World Maps. Curiously, in the natural world, you could find 3 big maps. They don't perfectly correspond to the world, but they do make a teeny bit of sense. It sort of places some of the landmarks and waterways correctly. There's also a fan theory that the orientation of the map, which shows the peaceful lands to the east and the violence district to the west, may potentially relate to Japan and the United States, but that's a very loose theory. The textures change a bit depending on what textures you have activated at that moment, and perhaps most strangely is that the map is on a TV, not an actual printed map. Alternate cover art. If you're one of the lucky few who manage to have an actual copy of this game, it comes with a lot of cool inserts, including alternate cover art. This was done a lot more frequently in the PS1 era than today, but the practice is something you see pretty often in gaming. That said, the art is pretty cool. Flashback. Flashbacks are an element of this game mentioned in the introduction, but basically, after you complete an unknown amount of events or encounters, like linking and touching special objects, you have the option to view a flashback. This usually occurs around the day 20 or 30 mark, but depending on how you play, it may come earlier or later. This is basically a slideshow of quote-unquote memorable moments selected by the game that you'll see in a dream within a dream-like haze. There's sort of a filter over these moments, with it being theorized that positive events look blue and negative events look red. It's a super strange mechanic on the whole. As mentioned, if you run into the Gray Man, he'll actually rob you of these stored memories and reset the progress to unlocking the flashback mechanic again. Moonlight Tower Dreams. Moonlight Tower is an area in the dreamscape where your dreams may begin, or that you can link to. And boy, is it weird. For some reason, when your dream starts at the Moonlight Tower, it's always shorter than usual. There's also a pretty interesting entity here, that being the Minotaur. It's a strange place for sure. Glitch textures. As mentioned, textures can glitch outside of their 4 normal possibilities and look even wackier than expected. One of my personal favorites is the giant baby head showing up with all of its facial features removed. Besides the textures glitching out like this, items can sometimes appear invisible. And also, on rare occasions, textures can blend into one another. These glitches are, surprisingly, a lot more prevalent on emulators of the game. Dream Chart Video Event. I believe this is referring to a phenomenon where if you manage to cover the nose, eyes, and some other specific cells in the dream chart, essentially meaning that you got a few specific dreams in a row, a long playlist of videos will play. As you can imagine, this is pretty difficult to trigger. Linen. Although we don't know its official name or purpose, Linen is what many in the community refer to this creature, appearing all over LSD promotional material and also on the main cover. He shows up in a ton of artwork by Sato, including more modern works. Occasionally, Linen actually appears in the game, and honestly just appears like a creature that Sato likes to draw. Even though we've never heard an explanation from Sato about Linen, we suppose this is his name because Sato's record label is called Linen Records. LSD meaning. Obviously, LSD sort of refers to the drug, but there's also good evidence it means other things because there are different meanings hanging around in different startup videos with different acronyms too. Here are a couple of these meanings.
Link Speed Dream, Lovely Sweet Dream, Lucy in the Sky with Dynamites, In Limbo Silent Dream, In Life Sensuous Dream, In Logic the Symbolic Dream, In Leisure the Sonorous Dream, In Laughter the Spiritual Dream, In Lunacy the Savage Dream, In Linking the Sapient Dream. So, take from that what you will.
Violence District Random Stretching. Stretching is a strange phenomenon in LSD, which essentially means that objects or entire areas just stretch upwards, getting extremely tall. There's a video of this phenomenon happening specifically in the Violence District, which looks very strange. Non-solid water in the natural world. Plenty of water in LSD Dream Emulator, coming from the rivers in the natural world, can just be walked straight through. Not swam through, but just walked on through like this. Lucy in the Sky with Dynamites. Very, very strangely, copies of the limited edition of LSD Dream Emulator came with a separate, bright-colored CD that contained a 1-hour-long track, the music of which is completely independent from the game. It's just a random hour-long track masterminded by Sato, but with some other people credited as well, titled Lucy in the Sky with Dynamites. It's just another piece of art, I guess? Uboa on the TV. In Bright Moon Cottage, the TV is a really unique object. It displays violent and creepy imagery, but when you interact with it, you can change aspects of your dream. One of the faces on this TV looks a lot like Uboa, a character from the game Yumi Nikki. Now this doesn't mean much, it's just a coincidence. However, it is known that the creator of Yumi Nikki, Kikiyama, which is a pseudonym by the way, played LSD Dream Emulator, which based on this interview response, possibly inspired some bits of Yumi Nikki. So could this character design have come from the creature that we see in the television? It's possible. Kyoto Buddha connections. In the Kyoto area, you'll encounter these Buddha statues that just move in a straight line. If you connect with them, you'll be linked to the pit and temple, this strange area, and people have speculated that there's a connection between the Buddha statues and the faces displayed on this temple, which don't quite line up with real-life Buddhist imagery, but are similar enough in terms of material and themes, I guess. There's got to be a connection here, given that you always link to this spot when you touch the Buddhas, but what that connection is, we aren't certain. Some Ordinary Gamers Let's Play. You may be familiar with Mudahar's channel, Some Ordinary Gamers. He's a pretty entertaining creator in my opinion. Back in 2014 and 2015, Mudahar uploaded some gameplay with commentary of this game. It's kind of fun to watch, his mic quality is terrible, and it's a cool glimpse into the past of a well-known and established creator, but yeah, it's basically just an LSD playthrough. Muscle Trainer. Muscle Trainer is a tool developed by a user named ConfuseMe, which basically allows you to teleport yourself around the map in LSD when playing on an emulator. You can only teleport to locations that have been loaded though, as if you go too far from your current position, the game will just crash. It's one of the many hacking tools that we'll discuss in this video. Happy Town Messages and Art. Happy Town is another location in the game known for its strange geometric drawings, which feature faces and patterns amongst other things. Some of these patterns reveal secret messages when looked at from the right angle, which are usually just short word blips saying things like LSD, sex, sky, and happy. Alien theory. So aliens are a big theme in LSD. Frequently you can observe alien spacecraft, and on top of that, the whole environment is obviously alien and strange. The alien theory proposits that you, the player character, are being probed by the aliens, who are experimenting on you and your subconscious, which is why you're experiencing these lucid and strange dreams. Further, it suggests that the Hat Man is a representation of this effect, as men in black are often titled to aliens in popular culture, where sometimes aliens come to Earth hiding in this trenchcoat and hat outfit, possibly explaining the nature of the Gray Man. In all honesty, this theory, and many like it, aren't definitive in the slightest. They just absorb some of the themes present in the game. There's no way to tell if this game is an alien simulation, but there is a lot of credence to the idea that the alien theme is represented here, especially given that the Gray Man erases your memories. Flesh tunnels represent the womb. I wouldn't even call this a theory as much as it is an observation. The flesh tunnels are an area in this game which, when mapped out, reveal themselves to be laid out like a uterus. If that wasn't obvious enough, the largest room in the flesh tunnels contained fetuses, so I'd say it's pretty clear that this area is a representation of the womb. For what thematic purpose though, who knows? And yeah, there's also some sumo wrestlers here. Makes sense, right? Set, text, or video dream days. On some days, your dream won't be actual gameplay when you walk around. On specific days, your dream will either be a text or a video that plays. Text dreams show white kanji over a black background, which simply read a strange observation or poem. These are designed to represent dreams from the dream journal, I suppose, and they actually have some sort of narrative, albeit strange ones. I'll read one of these off for you.
The next king. Many people have gathered here. From atop these stairs, I look down upon them. A man who has decorated his naked body with black feathers is walking between the people gathered. It's the next king, taking the place of the one who recently died. He proceeds quietly and walks down the stairs.
Further, we have video dreams. In the same vein, you get these in place of gameplay on some days, specifically 2, 7, 14, and 15, for example. And these two are just whatever. You might see sheep, UFOs, people, or the inner mechanisms of a VHS machine. That's just how it goes. OSD 310. OSD, or Outside Directors Company, was a multimedia company founded by Sato in 1998. OSD 310 is their YouTube channel. It is strange to say the least. It contains some LSD-related content, but also random other stuff from Sato's career. There are ads for the game, as well as some songs from it. You can still check out this channel today if you wish. This is not a game. From the start, Sato conceptualized LSD as a form of contemporary art, which merely used the PlayStation as a medium. In his own words, this is not a game. And many people would agree. There are no objectives, there's really no winning, and at the end of the day, this game was never marketed as a game. So you'll hear that phrase used frequently in the community. Texture cycle. I briefly filled y'all in on this before, but as a reminder, the game's textures swap out as you progress through more and more dreams, and eventually you'll rotate between 4 separate texture types: static or normal textures, dynamic or kanji textures, downer or evil textures, and finally upper or sexual textures. So besides looking different, what do these textures signify? Well, the community has presumed that the static textures are normal simply because they make the most sense and come first in your dreams. On days where kanji textures appear, nearly every surface has writing on it. It could either be a single kanji or entire paragraphs of text, all coming from the dream journal. Downer textures are considered evil because they're mostly red and warped. Also, anywhere you would normally see eyes, they grow large and cartoonish. Finally, sexual textures earn their name from the prevalence of lips, faces, and actual Japanese models. It's probably one of the weirdest themes in this game. There's a lot of theorizing about these textures and, in general, what the sexual themes of this game mean, which we'll take a look at later on. Darkening sky. Many of the areas in the dreamscape take place outside where the sky is visible. It's not always clear though, and fog, which changes color, frequently occurs. There are all sorts of colors, some darker than others. There was, at one point, a theory that certain quote-unquote dark things that you could do in the game, such as falling off of a tall spot enough times, would darken the sky, but that's since been disproven. The sky color is set to a specific cycle, and your behavior doesn't influence it in any way. Clockwork Machines Out of Bounds area. The Clockwork Machines area is a very dense, mechanical part of the dreamscape that you can get to pretty easily by linking from the Violence District. Sometimes you'll spawn underneath the machinery where there's no collision data, causing you to fall immediately and end the dream. To the community's knowledge, this is just a glitch with no story implications. This can happen in other spots of the game too, but this is one of the most common areas for this spawning error to happen. Falling through the mountains. Falling is a commonplace mechanic in the game, which causes an animation to play showing your descent and ending the dream. Sometimes though, it's a glitch, like the clockwork machines we just talked about, and you just fall through the map and end the dream. This happens in the mountains too, specifically. Rooftop spawn. In the same vein, this entry refers to a phenomenon that can occur in the Violence District. There's a spawn location up here on top of a building, and essentially, your only option is to decide how long you want to stay here before throwing yourself off and ending the dream. To my knowledge though, this isn't a glitch, and is actually an intentional part of the experience. However, a related glitch is that if you descend at the right angle, you can land in the alleyway safely, which appears to be unintentional. However, it's a nice option for those who don't want to end their dream quite yet. Dynamic texture set translations. The dynamic textures, the ones with kanji on them, aren't just nonsense. Okay, well, they are nonsense, but they're intelligible. They're little snippets of dialogue that are perhaps just a phrase or two long. I'll read some of them off for y'all.
Stop ringing. I'm going home. Jingai sent. I'm walking. The ones that do. I didn't buy the videotape. It's not a good idea in front of the station. I love it. There is a nearby road.
Moonlight Tower is in Kyoto. When in Kyoto, you could see the Moonlight Tower from the distance. Further, if you link with this building, you go to Moonlight Tower, suggesting that the Moonlight Tower is a sub-location within Tokyo. This honestly makes sense. Mayday. Mayday is a song by Sato from 1997 that doesn't appear in the official soundtrack for the game, but it does appear in the game. Here's a little snippet. Kyoto Remix NFTs. There are remixes of the soundtrack that are actually sold as NFTs from Sato. I'm not going to play them here because I'm not entirely sure how the rights work, but if you're morbidly curious, you can find the files out there. It's a goofy cash grab, and it shows how people are still taking advantage of this game and the mythology surrounding it years later to make some money. Nanshu. Nanshu is one of the more iconic figures that you can encounter during your playthrough of LSD. It's a floating head that appears on the Sun Bridge. Not a ton is known about this entity, as he doesn't really have a major role in the game, but curiously, this wasn't the first appearance of Nanshu. He actually comes from another game by Sato from 1995 called Chu 10. He has a bit more of a fleshed out story in that game, but it's all just kind of gibberish about how he's the gatekeeper of mid-heaven, I don't know. But it is another example of continuity amongst creatures popping up in games by Sato. Potential US localization. So as you know, the game never made its way to the West, at least in the sense that an official localization was never produced in English. There is, however, a fan translation that was announced in 2020, but nothing official. Sato mentioned that he wanted this game to make its way to the US, but apparently he had no say in the marketing decisions like that, and due to its poor sales in Japan, it never had the chance to make its way overseas. LSD Demo Movie 1997. This is the first showcase of the game, presenting renders of locations and some of the entities you might encounter. I won't play the whole thing because surprisingly it's over 6 minutes long. This isn't an actual beta you could play unfortunately, but there are a couple of cool differences that you can note between this version and the final release. The gray man is a bit different, buildings are laid out differently, entities are swapped for others, etc. You can also see what is potentially the player character, which is a fascinating detail, although it's not confirmed if this is actually you. Debug info. In the video we just talked about, you can actually see a debug menu pop up a few times. There's some info that you can glean from this. I personally can't read into it much, but I do think it's funny that they would leave this in the demo video, especially since it was pre-rendered. It's kind of funny. Corrupted music tracks. There are a few music tracks in the game that are coded incorrectly, like the one from the clockwork area where the tempo is set to 0, so it doesn't play correctly. Astronaut Link. There's a giant astronaut floating around Bright Moon Cottage, which also plays trumpet noises. But when you link with him, which is difficult to do because he only lands on rare occasions, he will always take you to the black space. Black space is a strange area in the game which is basically a terrifying void, which sort of makes sense that an astronaut would take you there. However, how does the linking mechanic actually work? Well, like I mentioned, it's rare that you can actually touch the astronaut. Normally he just flies away from the cottage roof, then spawns back at the roof to fly away again. But randomly, he'll approach the ground in what is called the landing event. The landing event is exactly what it sounds like, and while it's unknown how to reliably make it happen, there are a convoluted series of steps that you can take to maximize your chances of getting a landing event. If you link with the gray man and get sent to the cottage, it's more likely that the astronaut will land. However, based on minute differences in the game timer during every playthrough, this method isn't perfect, and it's a good example of the extremely rigid, false randomness of this game. Teleport triggers. You can transport within the dreamscape in some strange ways. Many are fixed, such as approaching this line which merely teleports you to a safe distance. But also during dreams you may encounter a random teleportation, like this.
Never noticed how buggy. The ghost can teleport you as well.
That's gotta be the strangest phenomenon you could encounter frequently. Like, as if this game isn't throwing enough at you, you just randomly teleport to the other side of the map. It's a weird mechanic. Wall clipping. Like many games, there are tons of exploits in this game that originate from clipping through walls, which is actually fairly easy to do in LSD. Using the run and turn buttons in a very specific way, especially near the Moonlight Tower fence, which is currently the thinnest known wall in the game, allows you to wall clip. That's a good place to practice until you get the timing right, because it is difficult to do, but once you're nailing it consistently, you can do this throughout the dreamscape. Stars. There are stars in the night sky that appear rendered only when the moon is also out, but based on the way the textures are rendered, they're nearly impossible to see. It's an interesting detail that was put into the game only to be rendered so terribly that barely anyone notices them. Sleeping while playing LSD. 13 years ago, a YouTuber named 2Guys Gaming uploaded a video titled Sleeping While Playing LSD. It starts with an introduction of him explaining what happened and then shifts to actual gameplay. Basically, what happened is that this guy fell asleep at his computer while working, and while sleeping, started playing LSD and recording it. We'll just let him explain what happened.
So I know none of you guys are probably going to believe me on this, but I've got to show it to you guys because this is completely freaking me out. I mean, absolutely freaking me out. So let me kind of give you the story. I'm at my computer and I'm doing work and I fall asleep. Now, I wake up, and have you guys ever had that feeling where you wake up and you just don't know like where you are or what's going on, kind of a deal? Your mind is really fuzzy, and that's kind of where I was when I woke up. So I got up and I had to go to the bathroom. So I got up and I go to the bathroom and I check on my wife and daughter who were both asleep. And I grab some chips and I come back in here, and lo and behold, on my computer screen was the LSD window. LSD was playing. I wasn't playing LSD when I fell asleep. Now I know a lot of you guys are going to look at me and think, yeah right, this is just a ploy or this is just a joke, but I'm being as truthful as I can here. I was not playing LSD.
Now, after this, we see him playing the game, and it's fascinating. He nearly never blinks, reacts to anything, or so much as twitches a single muscle in his face. He appears to be in some sort of microsleep or hypnagogic state, basically just walking in one direction or so and linking up with random walls. Eventually in the video, we see him wake up, which is super interesting. Could this be faked? Sure, but what would he have to gain from that? Anyone who sleepwalks or has had some sleeping issues could tell you that something like this is plausible, and it's lucky that we caught this on camera. This incident is super cool. It sort of fits in with the themes of the game too, and this man is potentially the only guy out there who can say he's experienced LSD in this state. Hanged woman chasing. The hanged women are entities you can find alone or in groups in the violence district. Under normal circumstances, they're terrifying as they can just pop out at you and sometimes lock your character, forcing you to link. But under some even stranger circumstances, they'll actually start chasing you, which doesn't happen frequently, but if it does, is terrifying. Strafe or backwards running. When you strafe or walk backwards in LSD, you're able to avoid certain triggers. It's an odd phenomenon, but in my opinion was likely intentional as a method of letting you control a bit of your dream after you figured out this trick. Tokyo Planet. Tokyo Planet is another game created by Osamu Seitu, which came out after LSD. Interestingly, when the baby heads in Kyoto display kanji textures, arranging them in a certain order will spell out Tokyo Planet, potentially alluding to this future game. On top of that, there's music in the Moonlight Tower that shares the same chord progression as the main theme in that game. Now, what's certain is that some elements from LSD made their way into that game, and it's plausible that Osamu Sato had an idea of what that game would be while he was making LSD, and some of those ideas just snuck in there. But we aren't really sure of all of the details. Floating Lips Heart. Figglewatts, the creator of LSD Revamped, made another really cool program called LSD View, which was basically designed to view models from the game. Strangely, when you look at these floating lips, they emit a heart, which looks different from the game. In the game, you can only see a tiny version of these lips emit a teenier heart that's literally the size of a pixel, so in my opinion, it's likely that the model for these lips is supposed to be emitting a heart, but it's bugged, which is why it only appears in the model viewer. Graph mechanics. This is potentially one of the most difficult things to explain about the game. The dream graph, or dream chart, is a mechanic that seeks to classify your dream after it ends. The basic mechanics that we do understand are that this image, which is of the character Lennon, is a chart with X and Y coordinates, where Lennon's nose is cell 00. In the instructions for the game, it's clarified that what you do and where you go affects chart placement, and from experimentation, we've come to learn that interacting with certain entities can shift your placement on the map. However, it's extremely unpredictable, and one way that it may work hypothetically is that interacting with one object shifts you 2 coordinates up, being in another place takes you 3 coordinates right, and so on and so forth, so that eventually you're in a seemingly completely random spot. The community has used hacking tools to try and specify these values, but we haven't uncovered all the mysteries yet. Beams logo. Okay, this is absolutely ridiculous. There's a Japanese clothing brand that still exists to this day called Beams, and for whatever reason, the employee whose dream journal inspired this game dreamed about that company a lot. So ODC naturally reached out and got permission to use the logo in the dreams, and they appear at the center of flowers occasionally. I don't even have anything to say about this one. It's such a weird detail. The Gray Man, the Aquabats. The Aquabats are a rock band formed in 1994, and they're pretty weird. They're Mormons, I think, and their music is fairly obscure. It's not super easy to get info on them, but they did release a song called The Gray Man that some have suggested might have been based off the Gray Man from LSD Dream Emulator. I find this unlikely. Even when this music came out in the late 90s, the Gray Man was a much smaller phenomenon than it is today. I find this unlikely, as when this music came out in the late 90s, the Gray Man was a much smaller phenomenon than it is today, and the lyrics don't really connect to this game at all. Either way, it's an interesting connection. Abandoned part of Kyoto. There's a section of Kyoto which is quite different from the rest of the city, where the buildings appear abandoned and condemned, with shut-up windows and doors. The ground textures appear broken as well. Thematically, it suggests that something happened here, but naturally we can't figure it out based on the information that we have, and it remains yet another confusing detail about this game. Happy Town Whale. The whale is a textureless entity that only spawns in Happy Town. If you approach it, it'll jump and dive a few times. This is what it looks like. Violence District Ghost and Giant Baby connections. In the warehouses that can be found in the Violence District, you'll encounter these ghosts, which strangely look similar to the giant baby in the Bright Moon apartment, basically in the way they move and their poses. Furthermore, since the giant head always links to the Violence District, it's possible that there's a sort of connection being hinted at here, though we have no way of confirming this. Osamu Sato knows about LSD Revamped. In an interview, Sato mentioned LSD Revamped, confirming that he knows about the fan remake. This is also very pertinent to the next entry. LSD Revamped footage in official music video. In this music video for Come On And, some of the LSD visuals used in the music video actually come from the revamped version of the game, not the original. It's interesting because it suggests that Sato nowadays prefers borrowing videos from that version of the game because it's easier to work with. Maybe that's a stretch, but regardless, it's cool that the game has that sort of recognition. Kyoto Bridge Geisha. There are geisha girls all over Kyoto, but one can spawn on this footbridge. If you end up linking with her, you'll be sent straight to the black space. Violence District is the sunken city. In the natural world, you can observe a city that has sunk into the water. It's theorized that potentially the Violence District is actually that sunken city. In my opinion, there's not much credence to this theory, it's just a fun thought, but it does potentially explain the darkness in Violence District. Japanese LSD DE Wiki. On this website, you can find a different LSD wiki than the fandom one. I can't speak for its quality personally because I can't understand a thing on this website, but some in the community say it's a far superior version to the English wiki and has a lot more information. literal emulated dreams theory. A theory that the creator of this iceberg told me they heard once was that the player character in-game is actually having their dreams emulated by some strange software. We have no way of confirming this, but hypothetically, it would explain why we have the graph at the end of each dream, and some other mechanics from the game. Perhaps the player character is part of some sort of experiment, or is piloting a new device designed for documenting the contents of dreams. Who knows? Game was named LSD for attention-grabbing purposes. This is an entirely plausible theory, and one I kind of agree with, honestly. This game isn't about drug use, it's about dreaming, and LSD itself has a ton of meanings in the game, as we know, most of which center around dreaming. It seems much more likely that the LSD abbreviation was just a marketing ploy, which is interesting to me because I would imagine it wouldn't be as effective in Japan than in the West, for example. But still, it's stuck and we're talking about it today, so I tend to think it did do something. Circle button. The circle button on the PlayStation controller can be used to interact with loads of objects, sort of functioning like an action button. You can use it to hop on the train or kill this wolf, for example, even though the instruction manual says that the button does nothing. Temple Dream Loop. If you manipulate the dream graph, you can find yourself stuck in a loop where you spawn in the temple above a pit, which you fall into, ending the dream and spawning yourself in the exact same location again and again, essentially soft-locking the game. LSD Promo Magazine. The LSD Promo Magazine is a bit of a promotional material that you can actually go read through on a website called SatoArchives.com. LSD Promo Videos. We've covered some of the trailers and promo videos for this game so far, but just to recap, there are a couple of these trailers, so I'm going to go ahead and play some of the shorter ones. Lovely Sweet Dream and Followers. This is a really awesome fan anthology from 2011 made by a bunch of different artists. It's sort of like an LSD comic book. But the really cool thing is that there's an English translation of it available, so you can actually read it if you're like me. Though it is fan-made and therefore not canon, it lets us look at a lot of the entities in different ways, giving us a new perspective on the story or situations in this game. I think it's pretty cool and worth reading if you want to learn more about LSD. zdummy.str. An STR file is a video or picture file used in PS1 games, and the zdummy file is a dummy file in the game that, through some mechanism I don't understand, forces the game's files closer to the center of the disk, making it load faster. You can't natively play this file, but if you do manage to rip it and load it onto a computer, it'll display this image. Link colors. When you link with an object and begin to transport away, the screen will fade into a certain color, that either being red, green, blue, yellow, cyan, pink, black, or white. Now, while there's no conclusive evidence of this, players speculate that the color of the dream determines whether or not you're going to have a happy dream, with red colors taking you to bad dreams, white to neutral, and so on. It's been shown that gray man encounters will cause black or pink links, but other than that, we aren't really sure what causes the link colors to be the way they are. Objects travel the dream world too. There's a line in the game manual that states that objects travel through the dream world too. This opens a gigantic can of worms up. It suggests that this world does not need our perspective to exist, which in turn dispels some theories about the nature of this game, like the dream emulation I previously mentioned. If the other entities move throughout this world and have some degree of agency, then maybe we're visiting a real place in some dimension, maybe physical or digital, as opposed to generating it within our own subconscious. There isn't enough information to truly answer the big questions about this game, but this is a big step in the right direction. Honestly though, I think this clue makes lore theorizing a bit more difficult by throwing out so many of our theories. Giant baby trigger on different floors. This entry refers to a glitch discovered by a community member named Kimamas, who has done a lot for this game by the way, which basically causes you to link with the giant baby head in the Bright Room apartment by standing on the floor above and looking down. I would guess this is some sort of collision error, which is probably due to the giant size of the baby, but I don't have the technical knowledge to truly flesh that out. Flying train in Happy Town. The Happy Town train is a strange object you can run into. Depending on the day, it either moves quickly or slowly, and depending on the texture, it may display the beams logo we mentioned earlier. It has two main events associated with it, the first being if you approach this tunnel near the Ferris wheel, the train will come to you and run you over. But if you press the circle at just the right time, you'll be teleported onto the train, becoming the conductor for a few seconds before linking. The second, and much more fascinating however, is that the train can take flight. In one of the rarest events in the game, decided upon entirely by your previous actions, the train can approach this column, stop for a bit, and then take off into the air. Too horrifying to recount. This is a super cool entry because it refers to some misinformation which I've actually seen personally. Basically, on an older version of the background page on the fandom website for this game, there was a note that stated on some days a text stream would pop up saying that the dream was simply too horrifying to recount. Eerie, right? Though I can't remember specifically where I've heard some YouTubers mention this, the thing is, every single text stream has been snagged and translated and not a single one says this, or anything like this. Somehow it made its way onto the fandom and was reported on, but no evidence of it actually exists. Ghost Sailor died in a plane crash. You can't get close to the Ghost Sailor. When you approach him, he'll disappear, only returning when you back up far enough once more. Strangely, when you force him to disappear, on occasion a plane will spawn, and frequently that plane will fly into the water, crashing in a red inferno. This connection, along with the ghost gazing out over the water, suggests that this is perhaps where the sailor met his end. Rare spy locations. Spy is mostly found in the main open areas of Kyoto, the Violence District, and Happy Town, though he can appear in a few other locations. This entry is mostly referring to the sub-locations within Kyoto, the Violence District, and Happy Town where the Gray Man can be, but doesn't usually go to. Speedrun.com categories. You might think, how could we speedrun a game with no objectives? Well, Speedrun.com answers this question, as it separates speedruns by the number of days you experience, which is honestly the only thing you can really do for this game. There are more obvious ones like 1 day or 365 days, which is considered the more traditional ending. But there are also races to complete 5, 10, 50, 100, or even 1,000 days. As you might imagine, it's not a game that people are super competitive with. But like any game, the speedruns are still pretty interesting and use some cool strats. This is a fun fact that doesn't really fit here, but I'm going to plug it in anyway. A figure named Saint holds the 6th fastest 365-day record from a run he put up in 2014 on his YouTube channel. Saint is a really interesting figure on the internet, and if you want to learn more about him, I recommend checking out a video on my channel about Schnell Online. It's a pretty cool story. Anyways, we're going to move on. Giant Hoop and Stick Girl. The Hoop and Stick Girl is an entity roaming the black space. Taking the form of a little girl playing, linking her will take you to Tokyo. Curiously, she looks a lot more like the Hopscotch Girl in the Violence District, and linking with her takes you to the black space, so there may be some connection there. Sometimes this girl happens to appear gigantic, like really big. It's not really sure why this size variation exists, but it does. Black space missing tiles. This entry, courtesy of Kimamas again, shows that there are some tiles in the black space that you'll just fall right through. Notably, one of these areas is right next to a spawn point, almost making a trap where one wrong move after entering the dream will send you into an abyss. It's likely just one glitch, but it does make this area much more interesting, and if we are to believe that this strange corruption is intentional, it could have some lore implications on the area as a whole. Spy is actually benevolent. Throughout this video, I've slightly taken the position that Spy, or the Gray Man, is an antagonist. His terrifying nature might be enough to make you think that, but him stealing your memories is even greater support than maybe he isn't on your side. But what if he was a benevolent figure, looking out for you, and is all around a good character? Well, he's not all bad. First of all, interacting with him is proven to increase the chance of rare encounters in the game, so he does, from some perspective, make the gameplay more enjoyable. But beyond that, what if he's simply erasing your memories because they're weighing on you, or they're just too terrifying? Trigger bypasses. There are some pretty simple ways to avoid a trigger in the game. Walking backwards for some reason nullifies some triggers. For the Gray Man specifically, looking straight up or straight down does the same thing. It's weird that your direction or orientation changes your collision properties, but it just goes to show that there's a ton of weird mechanics in this game. Perhaps these are intentional features, allowing well-seasoned players to have some greater control of their playthrough by skipping triggers they don't want to experience. But we don't know. Odd and even day differences. A and B type days occur on odd and even days, respectively. and the content of the dreamscape varies wildly depending on that day. For example, on B days, the astronaut appears in Bright Moon Cottage, but this won't occur on A days. The list of differences is too great for me to list here, but I find the mechanic kinda cool. It's weird that a game so convoluted with so many steps and triggers, complicated and misunderstood, has something as simple as an A-B day system. I don't know, I don't really get it. It is what it is. Timer variable. The timer variable is a critical part of hacking the game. Basically, it's how much time you spend in one place. And when community members dug apart the game, they found links between the timer variable and things like links and dream mood. The timer also makes certain objects appear or disappear, or events trigger. So setting the time variable to whatever you want can help you observe certain rare events. Time in the game is measured in special units, which are roughly equivalent to 20 units per second. LSD Twitter bot. There was an unofficial Japanese Twitter bot that would post Dream Diary excerpts every single hour created by a user named Kovo Passero. It hasn't been active since 2019 and was listed on the fandom for some reason. Since then though, it's become pretty irrelevant. Gunman's victim in the demo movie. In the main demo movie for LSD, there's a strange encounter where an NPC runs straight into the camera. There's two main speculations here. First off, he looks a lot like the guy that the gunman will shoot in one of the warehouses, so there's that connection. But on top of that, some people think that based off the fact that he approaches the camera, that this is perhaps a beta version of the Gray Man, or at least has some shared traits with him, though he moves a whole lot faster than the Gray Man does in the game. It's likely that this was just a model they decided to use for a random event in the trailer, but it's cool to think about. Official Soundfront samples. This is a pretty broad entry referring to the fact that Sato took samples from LSD and used them in his other works. This guy is a very multidisciplined artist, making tons of music and albums, and his work crosses mediums. None of it exists in a vacuum. Everything he does shares something with previous and future work, and the soundtrack in LSD is no different. There are some sound samples from the game that are used in other works all over the place. Bright Moon Apartment Unused Bathroom. There's a water closet or bathroom door in Bright Moon Cottage which can't be opened. If you use hacking tools or otherwise clip through it, you won't find anything, it's just an empty spot. But an interesting detail is that the bathroom, which is about the size as this empty room, appears in the 1997 demo movie, suggesting that perhaps you used to be able to go into this room. I think it's strange that this room was potentially completely made up at some point for the trailer, but then removed and had the door locked. I can't get why they would have taken out this room if it was already completely created, and especially given the nature of this game, but yeah, it's gone. Bright Moon Apartment Lion Textures. Strangely, textures for the head of the lion, which only appears in the natural world, is in the files for the Bright Moon Apartment, but they don't appear there. Furthermore, there are actually unique variants of the texture that don't show up in the game at all, which are pretty cool. Flesh Tunnels Sumo Ring Roof. As you can see here, the roof in the flesh tunnels above the sumo ring is completely modeled even though you can't see it in the game. It's just an extra detail that you can't notice. Invincibility frames. At the very start or end of a dream or right after a link during a screen fade, there are a couple of frames where the player is quote-unquote invincible, meaning they can't fall or be linked with. There are some exploits made available from this, such as getting to the far-off islands in the natural world. Happy Town's true appearance. There's a video that plays while you ride the Ferris wheel in Happy Town, which shows some slightly different textures from the walls, hinting at the possibility that there's an unused texture set, which is really what Happy Town should look like. It mostly just suggests that the video is made during an alternate stage of development, but it's equally possible that any of the 4 textures you have activated at any given moment aren't the true representation of that world. Origins of the leitmotifs and music patterns. A leitmotif is basically a theme in a piece of music, which I didn't know before I wrote the script. But basically in some interviews, Sato has stated that the in-game music has leitmotif from other works, meaning that, like we mentioned, the music in LSD is connected to other things he's made. The creator of this Iceberg shared a Google sheet that they started with some of these connections laid out, but it's at a very stage of development and it's likely we'll still be searching for these themes for quite a while. Sky colors are on a 240-day cycle. A phenomenon discovered by the creator of this Iceberg is that the skies appear to be set to a 240-day cycle. Depending on how you count them, there are 23 or 30 options for sky variants, and they run sequentially on this cycle. We've known for a while that these were predetermined and are relatively static, but Menderman managed to nail down the 240 number specifically. They actually managed to create a Google sheet where you can accurately predict a sky type based on the day. Looking up at Spot. We've mentioned briefly how looking upwards at Spy completely nullifies his trigger, making it so that he can't erase your memories. To be serious for a moment, I feel like there's two reasons this could happen. The first, and most likely in my opinion, is that it's just a glitch. But the second possible idea is that Sato left this trigger skipping mechanic in the game for experienced players to avoid dreams or encounters or whatnot that they didn't want to have. Or perhaps it's even just for playtesting during development. But let's entertain the idea for a second that there's some lore implication here. Some people like to build off the Spy antagonist theory, suggesting that he's some sort of murderer, or someone that was responsible for something traumatic in the memories of the dreamer. Essentially, the Gray Man could represent some sort of memory you're trying to repress or confront, depending on your perspective. What if looking up is some representation of ignoring the problem? Ignoring the traumatic memories by simply looking away. It doesn't make the Gray Man leave, it just buys you some time before he comes back. It's a fun thought, though given that there's no real way to win against the Gray Man, as in you can't permanently defeat him in any way, it might not be an apt description to call him an antagonist. The opera singers are actually ghosts. The opera singers are entities you can encounter in Happy Town and are quite strange. You can hear them singing, which is odd given that they only have legs and gloves, no torso or head, but not only that, you can't link with them because they have zero collision. You just walk right through them. Could these figures actually be ghosts, given that you pass through them? Perhaps they represent some sort of person that was cut off at the legs in a tragic accident or something. On top of that, sometimes a train can stop near them before flying up into the air. Some people have suggested that there's a lot of heavenly themes here, a train ascending upwards and the opera singers, which are sometimes present in depictions of going to heaven. It doesn't seem likely, it kind of just seems like we're taking snippets of themes and piecing them together. However, one piece of evidence that has been pointing out is their triangular quote-unquote heads. Figures known to be ghosts in the Violence District warehouses actually do have triangular heads, which has led some to suspect that the opera singers are the same and that in this game, triangles symbolize an entity being dead. Ghost Sailor isn't actually a ghost. On the topic of ghosts, and in the exact same vein as the previous entry, it is suggested, in contrast to the plane crash theory, that the Ghost Sailor isn't actually a ghost, since he doesn't have a triangular head. Perhaps he's just some other type of entity. Different startup FMVs per copy. It's been suggested that different physical copies on original hardware have slightly different startup videos, basically having to do with electronic circuits and the PlayStation having slight differences. This is actually sort of common on older consoles for FMV videos to not work perfectly. Monument Park Sphinx sounds. While exploring Monument Park and approaching the Great Sphinx, it's possible you'll hear what sounds like a slowed down version of footsteps from the Flesh Tunnel. It's not really understood what the ultimate source of this sound is or why you encounter it here. Natural World Inaccessible Islands. There are floating islands in the natural world that would normally be inaccessible and are just meant to be looked at, though some, but not all of them, can be reached using the invincibility frames that we talked about earlier. There's a map of them shown here, which is pretty useful. Monument Park is a last-minute addition. This is a theory coming straight from the Iceberg creator based on some minute details, especially regarding the file structure. Monument Park is listed as STG-13, the final map file. It's connected to Tokyo, which already has a sub-area, being the Temple Dojo. Further, it reuses a lot of music, such as that from the Flesh Tunnels. It's pretty small, flat, uneventful, besides the Zeppelin event, of course. It's just speculation, but regardless of how you look at it, this area doesn't quite mesh in with all the others perfectly, and perhaps it was just added in last. Alt-J. Alt-J is an English indie band who made a song called 3WW. In the single cover, there's an image that looks ripped straight from the game, which you can also see in the music video. You might just assume that this was inspired by LSD, but a one Mr. Sato is actually credited for the artwork. Now this song comes from the Relaxer album, which also had a web game released to help promote it, where you basically could walk through the Violence District while 3WW played. I'd honestly bet Sato helped work on this specifically. So why is it that the band picked LSD to help them advertise? This song was released years ago, a bit before the peak of LSD Dream Emulator popularity, in my opinion. It looks just like these guys needed something artistic to help them boost their music and settled on reaching out to Sato somehow, which is quite fascinating. But this album and the LSD promotion have since fallen into relative obscurity. Prince and Princess were murdered. The Prince and Princess are a pair of entities that you can find in the Happy Town castle. There's a theory that suggests these two characters are dead, based on their eerie robotic movements, and also to the fact that, similar to other characters we've talked about being dead, have no collision and you phase right through them. Now, whether or not they are murdered is a completely other debate, although given the events we see in Violence District, for example, and the general antagonistic and evil perceptions of characters like the Gray Man, they might fit into the murder theory that we mentioned earlier about him. Come On and voices. In the Come On and song, you can hear strange voices seemingly chanting in Japanese a few times in the background. These have never been translated into English, and personally, I'm not even sure if they're intelligible in Japanese. We obviously don't know what they mean, just that they exist. The game was possibly programmed in C. Okay, so this explanation is coming from someone who knows literally nothing about game development, but here goes. Most of this research comes from a Tumblr post from FiggleDev, who was working on tearing apart the game. And according to him, a crucial piece of evidence pointing towards LSD having been coded in C is this symbol called a format specifier, and I guess this is used in C. Beyond that, I can't add anything profound to this entry, just that this is what we think the game was coded in. Original resolution textures. The static textures in the game look hand-drawn, which suggests that there's possibly an original version of these textures which had its own resolution, unless of course the textures were made from scratch. Even if they are out there somewhere, we would have literally no idea where to look. Natural world voices from the abyss. While gazing out into the abyss in the natural world and around the bottom left, you can hear some strange noise. It sounds quite mysterious, but interestingly, if you speed up the sound a little bit, you'll find that it's the same as the bird tweeting from the Bright Moon apartment. I guess that means this is some weird bird in the void? Lions climbing trees. Just like in real life, I guess, lions in LSD can climb trees, though occasionally, instead of stopping at the top of the tree, they just keep on going. Yeah. Bright Moon Apartment's negative emotional aura. If you've been around icebergs for a while, you understand the negative emotional aura concept. Born out of wet, dry land in Mario 64 and that game's Iceberg, it's basically the idea that hanging around this area doesn't feel right. While this is the case for much of LSD, you may experience this vibe with the Bright Moon Apartments in particular. Basically, this area just feels spooky. I can't really describe it, but it does feel negative overall. Upper texture true identities. The upper or sexual textures are one of the strangest parts of this game, because some of these images come from actual Japanese prawn magazines. Ergo, lots of these women are actual people with real identities. You can imagine that the process of finding these women is pretty unnecessary and equally difficult, but yeah, they are real people, not just general inspirations. This is one of the weirdest parts of the game. The sexual motifs don't really fit in my opinion, and they leave so many more questions than answers. Links dictated to moods in game. In the instruction manual, this is said about links. In addition to walking, there's one other way of getting around from field to field. That is through links. If you touch something like a wall, tree, or barricaded object, you will be transported to another field. If sensation comes flying out of an object when you hit it, it can take you to another place. Not all objects are linked though. Links are dictated by your moods in-game with the scenery changing accordingly. So please enjoy yourself. Now this may offer a bit of an explanation as to how the link system works, but it doesn't make perfect sense. We just know somehow that the link colors depend on your graph's position. Bright Moon Apartment is a real place. According to the Dream Journal written by Hiroko Nishiwaka, this level is actually based off of a real apartment, and she even provides the exact address. I'm not sure if she lived in that apartment once or if she just knew of it, or what, but it is a real place. Sadly though, going to the address on Google Earth doesn't reveal much because it looks like the actual apartment is blocked on Street View by some sort of educational building. But it is a cool little detail. Not only is this apartment based in reality, but you could hypothetically go visit it. Bright Moon Apartment's retirement home. There's a theory that the Bright Moon Apartment isn't a traditional apartment, but rather a retirement or a nursing home, due entirely to the fact that the elderly woman is seen bedridden and eventually passing throughout the game. The main roadblock to this theory, however, is the fact that we just mentioned the apartment is a real place, which of course wasn't a nursing home. Happy Town is life, Violence District is death, and Black Space is purgatory. This theory also centers around the dying woman, as depending on her stages of vitality, she will link you to different places. While she's alive, she'll link you to Happy Town. While she is dead, she'll link you to the Violence District. When she's completely gone from this world, the bed will link you to the Black Space. Now, it's apparent that Happy Town is a vibrant place, the Violence District is one filled with death, and the Black Space is a purgatory-esque void. Perhaps the stages of this woman's life, and lack thereof, shine some light on the true nature of these places. Further, the Hoop and Stick Girl, as well as the Hopscotch Girl, who appear in the Black Space and Violence Districts respectively, look a bit like the dying woman, so perhaps these represent her in her youth. It's a fairly interesting idea. Spy diphenhydramine connections. This is a fun entry for me personally because I actually made a video going over the Iceberg chart for diphenhydramine abuse, which goes into detail about the Hat Man, which you may want to check out after this video. Anyways, basically, in recent years, the Hat Man has become a creepypasta or cryptid of sorts, originating from a couple of different places around the internet. He's sort of a culmination of a sleep paralysis demon and traditional views of the Men in Black, but he was identified specifically in the DPH community, which I explained in that video, and has since become a staple of those who've used that drug. Now, the view of the Hat Man, who looks a lot like Spy, didn't really come out until years after LSD was published, so Spy is in no way inspired by the Hat Man, but the other way around is possible. Though the Hat Man really came from a drug trip report, but I suppose it's possible that many artist renditions of him that are popping up nowadays could have taken some inspiration from the behavior of Spy as well as his appearance. This entry isn't super relevant to the game itself, but it's a cool little connection. Glitched father and daughter. This entry refers to another Hemamas video which we'll watch here. I'm not sure how this effect was generated, but it's quite strange. Monument Park Zeppelin link. On A-type days, you may catch the Zeppelin flying through the sky in Monument Park. It actually has a link taking you to Clockwork Machines, or occasionally the Black Space, but you rarely actually make it there because the Zeppelin doesn't land much. Cutscene music relationship. When a video plays on the menu or in a video dream, some strange effect is had on the random number generation. It's basically re-rolled, as was explained to me by the Iceberg creator. When certain videos play, it makes different sound fonts play, so somehow whatever videos are played affects whatever sound plays. The community is still digging after this one, but there is a connection here. Spy only appears on even days. This isn't a crazy entry, Spy just doesn't appear on odd or A-type days. Bugged Clockwork Machines track. There's an unused track from the Clockwork Machines area which should play but doesn't because the tempo is accidentally set to 0. We know this is an error because there are tracks that are legitimately silent and they're coded differently. This one is just a mistake. You can actually listen to the track if you put it into your computer. This game isn't random at all. What if I told you that the world-renowned game taking the internet by storm for its random, chaotic nature was entirely calculated? What if RNG had nothing to do with it, and every step you take in this dream, every single pace you walk, thing you touch, and the timing of events are calculating your entire experience? The thing is, that's more true than you would expect. Obviously, there is RNG in the game, that's undisputed. But beyond that, the graph is determined by events that may or may not happen. There are cycles, like the sky cycle or texture cycle, even cycles of days with A and B type days and their subtypes. There are thousands upon thousands of variables in this game that interact with one another to create the illusion of randomness, and the community is eagerly searching to uncover each and every connection to truly understand how this video works. Many people like Menderman, who made this Iceberg, and the other figures I mentioned in this video are diving deeper into this topic as we speak, and you best believe that when we have a better understanding of this game, I'll be here explaining what the community found. So if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing.
Okay guys, I really want to thank you for being here today. This was a super duper long but awesome video to make, and it's a milestone for the channel. For anyone who didn't know, not only did we just have our second birthday, but we also hit 10K subs, which is an incredible achievement that I could not be more grateful for. With that all said, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please consider showing some support so that we can reach towards even bigger milestones. If you want to be a part of the SeedButter community, I highly encourage you to check out the Discord server, the link to which is in the description of this video. You can come there and hang out with us and even help work on and pick future videos. On top of that, I do want to let you know that there is a SeedButter Patreon. Joining for just $1 a month will get you a thank you at the end of every video and access to future benefits that are on the way. If you even consider supporting the channel financially, thank you, as this Patreon enables me to spend more time making videos for you all. Finalmente, hay un canal en español si eres bilingüe, te animo que mires el canal. Pero te advierto que el proceso tomar su tiempo porque todavía estoy trabajando en las traducciones de mis videos viejos en español. Thanks again, everybody, and have a great night.